In the underworld, they say the most dangerous man in any room is the one nobody is watching, but they forget the older, truer law beneath it, that the most dangerous person is the one nobody bothers to look at all. They never saw her coming, because they never saw her, period. She was the soft, heavy, quiet woman in the black uniform who refilled the water and cleared the plates and folded herself small against the wallpaper. And, on the night the city's deadliest crime boss should have died choking on his own truce, it was not a soldier or a spy or a sworn assassin who saved him. It was the curvy maid they all called clumsy, the one a capo had laughed at an hour before, the one who knocked the wine glass out of his hand in front of 40 armed men and made every single one of them reach for a gun. They gasped because they thought she had lost her mind. Then they looked at the floor, and the gasp died in their throats because they finally saw what was inside the glass. Nora Sloan had spent 29 years learning how to disappear. She had learned it young, in the way heavy girls learn it, the way you fold your shoulders inward at the lunch table, the way you take the back stairs and the smaller chair and the last word nobody wanted. By the time she was hired into the DeLuca household, she had perfected invisibility into something close to art. And the irony, the thing none of them understood, was that invisibility is the finest listening device ever invented. People say everything in front of a woman they have decided is furniture. She knew which capo skimmed the construction take and which one was sleeping with a federal clerk. She knew the boss took his espresso scalding and his enemies cold. She knew the precise weight of every silence in that marble tomb of a mansion. She knew the housekeeper Renata's joints ached in the cold, and that the youngest soldier, a boy named Teo, sent half his pay to a sister in Calabria. And she knew these small, soft human things, because soft human things gathered around her, the way warmth gathers in low places, unnoticed, undisturbed, free to be themselves in front of a woman the world had decided did not count. That was the secret arithmetic of invisibility, that the price of it was the slow erosion of your own face, and the reward of it was 1,000 truths poured carelessly into your hands by people who would have killed to keep them hidden from anyone they considered real. She knew because she was always there and never seen, pouring, clearing, folding herself against the wall, while the men of the DeLuca family carved the city up over wine that cost more than her mother's monthly oxygen. That was the burden she carried beneath the apron, the one nobody at that table could have guessed. Her mother was dying in a rented room across the river, lungs failing by degrees, and every dollar Nora earned in that house of killers went to a machine that breathed for the only person who had ever told her she was beautiful. She did not have the luxury of pride. She had the job, and the job required that she not exist. But there was a thing she carried even deeper than the debt, a thing she had buried so well, she almost forgot it was a weapon. Before the bills, before the dropping out, before the uniform, Nora Sloan had been 3 semesters from a degree in toxicology, top of her class, the girl who could name a compound by its color and its smell and the particular way it caught the light. She had loved poisons the way other people loved poetry, for their secrets, for the way a single clear drop could rewrite an entire life. She had walked away from all of it to keep her mother breathing. She told herself she had forgotten. She had not forgotten anything. The dinner that night was supposed to be a piece. Adriano De Luca, the man the rest of the underworld called the architect, because nothing in his world happened that he had not designed 3 moves in advance, had spent a year building a truce between his family and the Marchetti syndicate that had bled the riverfront for a decade. He was a man carved from violence and quiet, broad and still, with eyes the color of wet slate that moved across a room and cataloged every breath in it. He frightened people simply by listening. He had a way of going so motionless that men confessed things just to fill the silence, and he never raised his voice, because a man who can have you killed by lifting one finger does not need volume. Nora had served him for 11 months, and he had spoken to her exactly twice. The first time he told her the espresso was perfect. The second time, on a gray afternoon when she had been crying in the pantry over a phone call from the hospital and had thought herself alone. He had stood in the doorway and said only quietly, "You are allowed to sit down." And then he had gone. And she had never told a soul, because it was the single kindest thing anyone in that house had ever done, and she did not believe a man like him would remember doing it. He remembered everything. That was the part she did not yet understand. The dining hall that night glittered like a held breath. 40 men in suits that cost a soldier's yearly wage. The long table laid in white marble and old silver, candle flame doubling in the crystal, the smell of roasted meat and money, and the particular ozone tang of men who all carried guns under their jackets and were pretending not to. The Marchetti delegation sat along one side, watchful, and the De Luca capos faced them. And at the head, in a chair like a throne he refused to treat as one, sat Adriano, still and slate-eyed and utterly alone in the middle of all of it. Nora moved along the wall with a bottle of Barolo, the color of a fresh wound, pouring into the great crystal goblets, folding herself small, listening, invisible, until she reached the capo named Vincent Galante. And he looked up at her and smiled the smile she had learned to flinch from before she could feel it land. Vincent Galante was a beautiful, rotting man, the kind who wore his cruelty like cologne. He had risen fast in the family, and he believed he deserved to rise faster, and he had spent the year of the truce smiling at Adriano and dreaming of the chair. Tonight, he had drunk just enough to let the dream show. As Nora leaned to fill his glass, he leaned back deliberately so that the spread of her hip brushed his shoulder, and he said, loud enough for the table, "Well, careful there, sweetheart. You knock something over with all that, and we'll need a crew to mop it up." And the laughter rolled down the table like spilled marbles, and Nora felt her face go hot and her shoulders fold inward in the old reflex. Smaller, smaller, vanish. "Just meat in an apron," somebody muttered, and somebody else laughed. "Fat cow can barely fit between the chairs." And she said nothing, because saying nothing was the rule, and she poured his wine with a steady hand and hated that it was steady, hated that she had trained herself to absorb a slur like a sponge takes water. And she moved on down the table toward the head, toward the architect, toward the great crystal goblet that sat by his right hand. She had learned long ago to take the cruelty and keep walking, to let it slide off the hard, polished surface she had built over the soft places, because the alternative, the answering back, the standing up, was a luxury that belonged to thinner women in safer lives, and she was neither, and she had a mother to keep breathing. And so she folded the insult away with all the others into the locked dark room inside her chest, where one day, she sometimes thought, there would be no space left at all. And it was there, in the half-second it took to lift the bottle over his glass, that the world tilted on its axis, because the goblet in front of Adriano De Luca was already full. Someone had already filled it. The wine inside sat a shade too dark, a hair too still, and across its surface, catching the candle flame, lay the faintest oily sheen. An iridescence like a soap film, a ghost of color where no color should be. And then, beneath the perfume of the Barolo and the candle smoke, she caught it, the thin, sweet ghost of bitter almonds, there and gone, a scent only some people on earth are even built to smell. And Nora Sloane, who had loved poisons once the way other people loved poetry, knew exactly what was in the glass, and knew that in the next 30 seconds, the most dangerous man in the city was going to lift it to his mouth and die. Everything in her screamed the rule. See nothing. Say nothing. Be furniture. You have a mother across the river who breathes because you fold yourself small in rooms full of killers, and you do not, ever, make yourself seen. If she was wrong, if it was a trick of the light and her own frightened brain, she would humiliate herself and lose the job, and the machine would go quiet, and her mother would drown in her own bed. And if she was right, if she opened her mouth and named it, then she would be a witness, a loose end, a heavy, invisible woman who knew that someone at this table, had reached into the heart of the DeLuca family and tried to murder its king. And people who knew things like that did not live long enough to spend their next paycheck. She did the math the way she had once done it over a lab bench at 2 in the morning, cold and fast and merciless, weighing the molecules against the men, the dose against the distance, the half-second she had against the lifetime she wanted, and every clean line of the calculation pointed to the same answer, which was that the safe move and the right move were not the same move, and they almost never are. And that is the whole brutal secret of being a person instead of a piece of furniture. The safest thing, the survival thing, the thing 11 months of swallowed slurs had trained into her marrow, was to set down the bottle and walk to the wall and let the architect drink. Let him die. It was not her war. Nobody in this room had ever once chosen her. And then, unbidden, in the half-second the candle flame guttered, she heard it again. That low gray voice in a pantry doorway on the worst afternoon of her life. You are allowed to sit down. The only human thing said to her in 11 months by the only man here who had ever looked at her and seen a person instead of a function. He was already lifting the glass. His fingers, long and scarred, were already closing around the crystal stem, and his wrist was already turning, and the bitter sweetness was rising. And Nora Sloan made the only decision her hammering heart would allow, which was that she would rather die a person than live as furniture, and she moved. She did the one thing a woman like her was never, ever supposed to do. She lurched forward with her whole soft, heavy body, made it clumsy on purpose, let her hip catch the edge of his chair, and her hand fly out wide, as though she had simply, stupidly, fatly stumbled, and she struck the goblet from his hand a quarter-inch before it reached his lips, and the crystal left his fingers and turned over once in the candlelight, scattering its dark iridescent wine in a long arc across the white marble floor, and the entire room came apart at once. 40 men moved as one animal. Chairs screamed back from the table. A dozen jackets flew open, and the dining hall filled with the oiled metal sound of guns clearing leather, every barrel swinging toward the heavy maid in the black apron who had just assaulted Adriano De Luca in front of the Marchetti syndicate, who had struck the king's hand in the king's own house, an insult so total that there was no version of the next 10 seconds in which she walked out of that room alive. She heard Vincent Galante's voice rising over the chaos, triumphant, almost delighted. Somebody put that clumsy cow on the floor. Did you see? She went for the boss. And she saw the lieutenant they called Bruno, the stoic mountain of a man who handled the family's cleanup, level a pistol at her chest with no expression at all. Nora did not run. There was nowhere to run and no breath to run with. She stood frozen over the spilled wine, with her empty hands still outstretched, waiting for the bullet, and she watched the only thing left she could control, which was the floor. Because the wine she had knocked across the marble was not behaving like wine. Where it pooled in the seams of the stone it had begun, very faintly, to hiss, a thin, pale fizz like seltzer breathing out, and the white marble beneath it was clouding, blanching, the polish dying in a spreading bruise, and where the spray had struck the base of the nearest silver candelabra, the bright metal was turning. Right there in the candlelight, a sick tarnished black, the way silver only ever turns in the presence of one specific family of compounds, and rising off all of it, unmistakable now, even to men who had no science in them at all, came the sharp, sweet chemical reek of bitter almonds, thick enough to taste. The guns did not lower so much as forget themselves. Bruno's barrel drifted down an inch. A Marchetti soldier crossed himself, and into the dead silence, Adriano De Luca, who had not moved, who had not so much as flinched when the glass left his hand, looked down at the blackening silver and the dying marble and the woman standing over it, and he said, in a voice like a stone dropped down a very deep well, "Nobody move," and the whole room obeyed the way the tide obeys the moon. He stood. He did it slowly, unfolding to his full height, and he walked around the head of the table to where the wine still hissed in the seams of the floor, and he crouched, the most dangerous man in the city. And he passed his scarred hand an inch above the surface and breathed in once and then drew it back. When he straightened, his slate eyes found Vincent Galante, and Vincent's beautiful rotting face had gone the gray of old candle wax, because Vincent understood, before anyone else in the room, that the woman he had called a clumsy cow had just dismantled a year of his patient murder in a single heave of her hip. Adriano did not shout. He never shouted. He said only quietly, "Whose hand poured my glass," and the silence stretched until it screamed. And then Bruno, reading the boss the way a hound reads a whistle, crossed the room in 4 strides and took Vincent Galante by the collar and hauled him up out of his chair and into the open. "Test it," Adriano said. "There is a man at this table who knows what is in that glass, because he chose it. Let him show us." And Bruno forced the trembling capo down toward the spilled wine and the blackened silver, and Vincent began to babble, to swear, to weep that it was a frame, that the fat maid had done it, that he was loyal. And the more he babbled, the more certain the room became, because guilty men explain and innocent men only stare. Adriano let him talk for exactly as long as it amused him, which was not long. Then he turned deliberately, his back to the man who had tried to kill him, the single most contemptuous gesture in the entire grammar of that world. And he walked instead toward Nora Sloane, and the closer he came, the smaller she tried to fold. The old reflex, vanish, be furniture, until she had her back against the wallpaper she had spent 11 months pretending to be. He stopped an arm's length away. Up close he was enormous and quiet, and smelled of cedar and gun oil, and his slate eyes moved over her face the way they moved over a room, cataloging, and what she saw in them was not anger at all. It was something she had no name for, because no one had ever once aimed it at her. He looked at her, the way you look at a thing you have badly underestimated. And then Adriano De Luca, the architect, the most dangerous man in the city, gave her one small, almost imperceptible nod, the nod of a man telling another professional, "I know exactly what you just did, and I know exactly what it cost you," and Nora's knees nearly went out from under her. She had spent her whole life waiting to be seen and bracing for it to hurt, because every time anyone had ever truly looked at her, it had been to measure her against something she could never be. And now the most dangerous man in the city had looked at her with his cataloging slate eyes and found, in the column where everyone else wrote too much, the single word she had never once been given, which was enough. What happened to Vincent Galante happened in another room, and is not a thing she chose to picture, then or after. Bruno took him away, and the truce dinner ended without another word, and the Marchetti delegation left quickly and quietly, all of them recalculating, all of them having watched the architect's enemy try and fail, and understanding that the De Luca family had a guardian angel they had not accounted for. The mansion emptied, the candles guttered, and Nora found herself led, not thrown out, not silenced in an alley, but led, by Bruno's enormous gentle hand on her shoulder, through the cold marble halls to a study lined with books she would never have guessed a killer owned, where a fire burned low and Adriano De Luca stood with his back to it, waiting for her. 2 glasses of something amber poured, and one held out toward her across the dark. "I did not poison this one," he said, and it took her a moment to understand it was a joke, the driest joke in the world, offered to a woman whose hands were shaking too hard to take the glass. So he set it down on the table beside her instead, within reach, the way you leave food near a creature you do not want to frighten. And he said, "Sit down. You are allowed to sit down." And she heard the pantry in it, heard that he had said it on purpose, heard that he had remembered the worst afternoon of her life, and she sat, and the tears came, and she hated them, and could not stop them. He let her cry. He did not fill the silence. When she had finished, he said quietly, "You knew before you touched the glass. You smelled it. Tell me how a maid knows the smell of cyanide salts across 2 feet of candle smoke, and Nora Sloan, who had hidden every true thing about herself for 29 years, found that she was too tired and too undone to hide anything anymore, and she told him. The toxicology, the top of her class, the mother across the river, and the machine that breathed for her, and the 3 semesters she would never finish, and the degree she had traded for a uniform. She told him that she had recognized the iridescence and the stillness and the scent because she had loved those secrets once, before life had folded her small. And she told him the part that shamed her most, that she had stood there with the bottle in her hand for half a second and considered letting him drink, because no one in that room had ever once chosen her. And the only reason she had moved was that he had told her, once in a pantry, that she was allowed to sit down. He was quiet for a long time after that, the firelight moving on his still face, and when he spoke, his voice had changed, gone low and rough at the edges, the voice underneath the voice. "Do you know what every man at that table saw tonight?" he said. "They saw a clumsy, heavy woman make a fool of herself and get lucky. They will tell it that way for years, because they are too small to understand what they witnessed. I saw something else. I saw a tactician read a room of 40 armed men and find the one threat none of them could see. I saw someone make a calculation under fatal pressure in under 3 seconds and choose correctly to disguise the only counter-move available as an accident, so that the poisoner would expose himself before anyone could silence the witness. I saw a soldier's courage in a body that the world taught you to apologize for. And I want to be very clear with you, Nora, because I do not say things twice." He stepped close. He looked down at her, at all of her, slowly and without flinching and without the hunger that made her skin crawl when Vincent did it, but with something steadier and far more dangerous. And he said, "There is nothing about you that is too much. You have spent your life made to feel that you take up too much room. And tonight, you took up exactly enough room to keep my heart beating. And from this moment, I intend to spend a great deal of money and violence, making certain you never again fold yourself small in any room you walk into." She started to say that she could not, that her mother, that the bills, and he lifted one finger, the finger that ended men, and he said, "Your mother had a private nurse and the best pulmonologist in the state as of an hour ago, while you were crying in my study. That is no longer a thing you carry. I carry it now." And the strange thing, the thing she would turn over in her mind for the rest of her life, was that it did not feel like being bought. It felt like being seen, finally, completely, by the one set of eyes in the world that missed nothing, and being judged by those eyes to be worth protecting. For most of her life, worth had been a thing other people withheld from her, doled out in grudging fractions, or denied outright across the rim of a wineglass, and to have it simply handed over whole, without condition, by a man who had no reason to flatter and every reason to lie, undid something in her that 11 months of swallowed insults had wound bowstring tight, and she felt it loosen in her chest, like a held breath finally let go. He named the danger plainly, because he was not a man who let people walk into the dark unwarned. "You understand that you are a target now," he said. "Galante did not act alone. Men like him never do, and the people who wanted me dead will very quickly learn that the woman who stopped it can recognize their methods on sight, which makes you the most useful and the most hunted person in my world as of tonight. I can put you on a plane with enough money to vanish, and I will, if that is what you want, and I will mean it. Or," and here the architect of the city's underworld did a thing his own capos would not have believed. He hesitated. This man who never hesitated, and the hesitation was its own confession. "Or you can stay, and I will build a fortress around you so total that the people who insulted you tonight will spend the rest of their short lives terrified of the woman they called furniture." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and he took a strand of hair that had come loose from her uniform and tucked it back. his scarred fingertips just grazing the warm skin at her temple, and he breathed in, and a ghost of a smile touched the corner of that lethal still mouth, and he murmured, almost to himself, "Vanilla. You have always smelled of vanilla. 11 months I have known it." And then, lower, "Mia cara, Regina, do not run from me. Stay and be the thing this city never saw coming." And Nora Sloan, who had spent 29 years folding herself small against the wallpaper of other people's lives, looked up into the slate eyes of the most dangerous man in the city and felt, for the first time, every inch of herself unfold. She did not shrink. She did not apologize for the space she took up. She reached up and closed her soft hand around his scarred one, where it rested against her cheek, and she said, in a voice that did not tremble at all, the flat, devastating, quiet voice she had never once been allowed to use, "Then stop building me a cage and start building me a chair at your table, because I am done being the thing nobody looks at." And something in his eyes caught fire, and he kissed her. The architect, the devil, the man carved from violence, he bent his whole still lethal self around her, like a fortress, folding shut, and kissed her, as though she were the one thing in his ruthless, ordered world he had never planned for, and could no longer live without. And she kissed him back as a queen kisses, not as a woman who is grateful to be chosen, but as a woman who has just chosen herself. The fire popped in the grate, and the great cold house held its breath around them, all its marble and all its locked doors. And somewhere in its bones, the long winter of it began, very quietly, to thaw, because the woman it had been built to ignore had walked into its center and refused, at last and forever, to disappear. And a man who measured everything had measured her and found her without limit. And in the rented room across the river, her mother slept, breathing easy for the first time in a year, and the marble in the dining hall would carry the pale ghost of that spilled poison forever, a stain no polish could lift, a permanent monument to the night the underworld learned its newest and most terrible law, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody bothered to look at, until she knocked the wine from the king's hand, and they finally saw. And that is where I have to leave Nora and her architect for tonight, standing in the firelight at the beginning of a war the whole city is about to lose. And oh, I am so glad you stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, because I genuinely got chills writing the moment that silver turned black and 40 guns forgot what they were for. If your heart was pounding when she made her choice in that half second, if you stood up a little straighter when she told him to build her a chair instead of a cage, then do me one small favor and smash that like button right now, because it tells me you want more stories where the woman the world underestimated turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room. Share this with the friend who always roots for the underdog, the one who needs to hear that taking up space is not a flaw, but a force. Subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss the next chapter, because believe me, Vincent Galante was not the last man foolish enough to call Nora Sloan furniture, and the people who sent him are about to find out exactly what she learned in those 3 semesters she never finished. And before you go, I have to know, so tell me down in the comments. The second she smelled those bitter almonds and her hand was already on the bottle, would you have had the courage to knock that glass from the most dangerous man in the city's hand, knowing every gun in the room would turn on you? Or would you have let him drink and saved yourself? Be honest, I am reading every single answer, and the best one is going straight into the next story.